I'm Danny Brooks, 39, an engineer working in a private firm in Savannah, Georgia. I've lived here most of my life, always grounded in the small-town rhythm, nothing too flashy, just steady and reliable. For 12 years, Harper and I lived a life that many would call a fairy tale. I married my high school sweetheart, built a home together, and worked hard to build a future. We even had big dreams of starting a family. But life, as it tends to do, threw us some curveballs we weren't prepared for, and those curveballs hit hard. The hardest hit came when we lost our child. It's a grief no one can truly understand unless they've gone through it themselves. I remember the emptiness of those first few months, the awkward silences between us as we tried to figure out how to be around each other again. We didn't know how to grieve together. Harper became distant, retreating into herself, while I tried to keep it together, thinking that if I kept pushing forward, she would come around. She didn't. At least, not in the way I expected. The years that followed were an uphill battle, trying to reconnect, trying to heal. We saw counselors, we read the books on marriage, and we worked on what felt like every single day of our relationship. And honestly, at first, it felt like we were making progress. Little by little, we started to find our rhythm again. She would come home, we'd talk about our day, we'd laugh at silly things, those small, everyday moments that seemed to be what kept us going. For a while, I thought that maybe we could rebuild, maybe the pieces of our brokenness could fit back together, just a little bit different, but still whole. That night, though, I found out how wrong I was. It was one of those nights where she had a work party to go to. She was an event coordinator, so these parties weren't anything new for us. But something about this one felt different. It was one of those odd things, like a tiny instinct in the back of my mind, a slight shift in the atmosphere that I couldn't put my finger on. She told me she'd only be there for an hour, and I'd planned on showing up a little early to surprise her, maybe grab a drink before she'd head out for the night. I figured it would be a nice, low-key thing. But that night, the universe had other plans. I arrived earlier than I thought, pushing open the doors of the venue, expecting to see Harper and a bunch of colleagues mingling, maybe even a few awkward work conversations happening. What I didn't expect was to walk in on a moment that felt far too in asterisk mate. I spotted Harper almost immediately. She was in the middle of the dance floor, her hands resting on her boss's shoulders as they swayed to the music. But it wasn't a formal dance, not one you would expect at a work event. It wasn't even a colleague-polite type of moment. They were close, too close. She had her head resting against his shoulder, her body leaning into him like she was wrapped in the comfort of his arms, not just standing next to him in the middle of a party. It took me a few moments to process what I was seeing. I just stood there, frozen, watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of it all. I thought maybe I was just seeing things, maybe it was just a fluke, a harmless moment in an otherwise busy, chaotic evening. But then Harper caught sight of me. The way she pulled back, the way she suddenly straightened and looked away, it wasn't normal. It wasn't like someone who had just been caught in a casual, innocent embrace. It felt rehearsed. She looked at me, a tight smile stretching across her face. The kind of smile you put on when you're caught red-handed and need to do some serious damage control. Later, when she came over to me, she was still smiling, but there was something forced about it. She brushed off my silent stare with a quick laugh, telling me, oh, he was just drunk. He almost fell, and I had to catch him. She laughed again as if that made everything normal, as if I should just accept that explanation and move on. And for a second, I almost believed it. I almost let myself dismiss it, chalk it up to something I misunderstood. But something twisted in my chest, a gut feeling I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the words she said, it was the way she said them. The way she kept avoiding my eyes, how she acted as though the entire situation had been nothing more than a joke. She tried so hard to paint herself as the victim, someone who just got caught in a misunderstanding, but I couldn't shake the image of them together. Their bodies were too close. There was a warmth between them that didn't belong at a work event, a closeness that felt more like an asterisk Macy than a friendly gesture. I didn't argue with her, though. I didn't press her for more answers. I let it go. Why? Maybe because I didn't want to face what was becoming painfully clear. Maybe because, deep down, I wasn't ready to see the truth and it hurt too much to confront it head-on. I didn't want to imagine my wife, someone I thought I knew inside and out, becoming someone else, someone who could lie to me without a second thought. I had been so focused on the idea of us rebuilding our lives, on fixing things, that I had overlooked the signs. Over the past few months, I had noticed Harper slipping away from me in small ways. She started coming home later, hiding her phone screen whenever I walked into the room, not asking about my day like she used to. She even started planning trips without me. I remember one time she told me she was going to a marketing conference in Florida. I didn't question it, but I felt something shift in me. Harper and I used to talk about travel together, our little adventures, our future plans. Now, those conversations were gone. I should have connected the dots sooner. Harper's wardrobe had changed too, more tight dresses, more expensive perfume, a level of effort in her appearance that wasn't there before. I noticed her laughing in the bathroom one night, talking to someone on a video call. When I walked in, she quickly shut her phone off and her expression turned cold. But when I asked about it, she gave me an answer that didn't sit right. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to ask about the phone calls, the strange behaviors. I wanted to demand an explanation. But I didn't. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was all in my head, that maybe the pieces didn't fit together the way I thought they did. But the signs were there, weren't they? Right on the surface. And that night, when I saw her dancing with her boss, I knew. I just didn't want to face it. The truth was becoming too loud to ignore. After that night, something inside me shifted. I started seeing things differently, replaying moments in my mind that I'd brushed aside before. Harper's behavior had been changing for months, but I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. Maybe I was too blinded by my own need to believe in the marriage we'd built, or perhaps I simply didn't want to see the cracks in the foundation. But now, with that one image, Harper swaying in her boss's arms, it all became so much clearer. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had pulled back when she saw me, the way she smiled as if everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. In hindsight, it was as if she was already preparing herself for the inevitable confrontation. A confrontation I hadn't yet realized I needed to have. In the days that followed, I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind. But the more I tried, the more they grew, like weeds spreading throughout my thoughts, twisting and turning until they were all I could see. I found myself watching her more closely, paying attention to the smallest details. And with every new thing I noticed, my suspicions grew. Harper had started staying late at work more often. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy, but this felt different. There was a shift in her behavior, like she was avoiding me, keeping secrets behind the closed doors of her office. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just work piling up, long hours, the usual. But the longer she was gone, the more I found myself staring at the empty chair across from me at dinner, wondering where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. It wasn't just the late nights either. Harper had started hiding her phone from me, a little too deliberately. I could see her screen lighting up whenever she got a message, but when I walked into the room, she'd suddenly turn it face down or quickly swipe it away like she was hiding something. I asked her about it once, jokingly, and she brushed it off, saying she was just busy with work. But I knew better. It was more than that. And I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach whenever I caught her doing it. And then there was the trip to Florida. Harper had mentioned it months ago, an important marketing conference that she had to attend for her job. We used to plan trips together, always discussing where we'd go next, what we'd do. But this time, Harper didn't even ask me if I wanted to join her. She just booked the flight without so much as a second thought, like I wasn't even part of the equation. When I questioned it, she gave me the excuse that it was a work thing, that it would be boring for me. I didn't buy it. But I didn't say anything. I just let it go, chalking it up to work. Maybe I was fooling myself, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her then. Thanksgiving came, and that was when I really started to feel the weight of what was happening. Harper had always been the one to remind me of family events, to make sure we spent the holidays together. But this year, she forgot to mention that she was going to her aunt's for Thanksgiving. I didn't find out until the day of, when she sent me a last-minute text saying, "Oh, I'm at Aunt Janet's." It was kind of spontaneous. I didn't get angry. I didn't want to seem suspicious. But something inside me churned. Spontaneous? Harper had never been spontaneous about holidays. She was the planner, the organizer. This was a complete departure from her usual behavior, and it felt wrong. When she came home that night, she seemed different, more distant, as though she had been gone for much longer than a single day. She didn't talk much, and when I asked how her aunt was doing, she gave me a short answer and changed the subject quickly. I let it slide, thinking maybe she was just tired from the trip. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the Harper I had known. The woman I married would have been excited to share every little detail about her trip. Instead, she was closed off and quiet, and I started to feel like I was the last person she wanted to be around. I could see the change in her appearance too. It wasn't just the way she looked. It was the way she carried herself. Harper had always been beautiful, but in the last few months, it seemed like she had put more effort into her appearance than ever before. She started wearing tighter, more revealing clothes, dresses that hugged her body in ways that were unusual for her. She wore stronger, more expensive perfume, and I could smell it on her even when she wasn't home. It clung to her clothes like a marker of her secret life, a life I wasn't part of. It wasn't just about her looks, though. It was the way she seemed to care more about what others thought of her, and less about the life we had built together. There was one night, about a week before I found out the truth, that really stood out in my mind. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when I heard Harper's voice coming from the bathroom. She was laughing, talking to someone on a video call. I couldn't make out who it was, but I knew it wasn't me. When I walked toward the bathroom, I heard her quickly turn off the screen. She looked at me, and for a split second, her expression was cold, like she was irritated I'd interrupted something. It was fleeting, but it was enough for me to notice. Later, when I asked her about it, she told me it was just a work colleague, someone she had to catch up with about a project. But when I asked what they'd been talking about, she changed the subject. I pressed her once more, but she gave me one-word answers and quickly retreated to the bedroom. I felt the distance grow between us like a wall that I could no longer break through. Harper had built this invisible fortress around herself, and I was on the outside looking in. At that point, I realized what I had been trying so hard to avoid. I had been so caught up in trying to keep the marriage intact, in trying to rebuild what we once had, that I had ignored all the signs. The late nights, the secrecy, the detachment. They were all clues that something was very wrong. But the hardest part of all was not the signs themselves. It was how I had let them pass me by. I had been holding onto a version of Harper, the one I had married, the one who had shared my dreams and fears. But that version of her was fading, and in her place was someone else. Someone who seemed to have moved on long before I had even realized she had. Someone who was living a life I wasn't part of. It all came crashing down on a routine morning. The kind of day that started like any other, with the sun creeping through the blinds, the soft hum of the coffee maker in the background, and the smell of Harper's perfume lingering in the air. I didn't know then that this ordinary day would mark the beginning of the end for everything I thought I knew. I had always been someone who respected boundaries, whether it was personal space or privacy. I never snooped through Harper's things. I trusted her completely, or at least I thought I did. But that morning something changed. I didn't intend to violate her privacy. In fact, it was the opposite. I was just trying to get a document printed from her laptop. She was getting ready for work, and I needed something that was on her computer. I didn't think twice. But when I opened the lid, the screen flashed to life, and something caught my eye. A notification from a messenger app. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but the message had a name I didn't recognize. There was no reason for it to catch my attention, but it did. It was a gut instinct, that feeling that tells you something isn't right. The message preview was enough. Just the initials. It wasn't one of her colleagues. Not someone I had ever heard her mention. I glanced at it for a second too long, and the next thing I knew, I was staring at the open chat. I don't know what I expected to see, but what I found took the ground right out from under me. There were photos. Not just innocent ones, but ones that were personal. Int asterisk mate. Smiling faces, close-ups of their bodies together, and messages that were, well, they weren't meant for me. Messages that spoke of things that I couldn't even begin to process. I scanned through them too quickly, too desperately, trying to piece together what had been happening behind my back. I can't believe last night was so perfect. Can't wait to see you again. One message stood out among the others. Another followed soon after. You make me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled further down. The more I read, the more I understood. The affair was real. It wasn't a one-time thing. They had been meeting for weeks, if not months. Harper hadn't just slipped up once. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a full-blown relationship. And just like that, everything I had built my life on, the trust, the commitment, the love came crashing down. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. I felt like I was suffocating. I closed the laptop slowly, as though by doing so, I could undo what I had just seen. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed screen, trying to gather myself. Trying to process what had just shattered my world. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But I knew deep in my gut that I couldn't unsee what I had just discovered. I left the house without a word. I couldn't stay there. It felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. I drove aimlessly through town, the streets blurring together, but none of it made sense. I couldn't even focus on where I was going. I kept seeing flashes of Harper's face, her smile, the way she had looked at me the night she danced with her boss, and the message on her laptop. It felt like my world was spinning out of control and I couldn't stop it. I ended up driving to a park on the outskirts of town, parked my car, and sat there for what felt like hours. The silence was deafening and it gave me too much time to think. My thoughts were like a storm, violent and fast, each one more painful than the last. I tried to wrap my head around what I had learned, but I couldn't. I kept replaying the same questions over and over in my mind. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I see it? Why didn't she trust me enough to tell me the truth? When I finally returned home that afternoon, Harper hadn't noticed my absence. Or maybe she was pretending not to. She was acting like everything was normal. She walked in, smiled at me, and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. She was dressed for work, already running late, already too preoccupied with her own world to notice that mine had just shattered. I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to yell at her, scream at her for betraying me, for destroying everything. But I didn't. I couldn't find my voice. I didn't trust myself to speak. So I stayed silent. The silence between us was thick, and every minute that passed felt like a dagger in my chest. The worst part? She didn't notice the silence. Not really. She didn't seem to care. Maybe she thought I was just upset over something trivial. Or maybe she just knew I was no longer a part of her life in the way I used to be. Either way, she didn't reach out. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't care. That night, I slept on the couch, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bring myself to face her in our bed. Every inch of our home had become a prison, a reminder of the life I had thought we were still living. I had no idea how long she had been having this affair. I didn't know how deep it went. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't trust her anymore. I couldn't trust a single word that came out of her mouth. The next morning, nothing changed. Harper carried on like everything was fine, like nothing had shifted, like our marriage wasn't hanging by a thread. But I wasn't the same. I wasn't the man who could just go about my day pretending that nothing was wrong. She must have sensed something was off because she asked me if I was feeling okay. But it wasn't genuine. It was just the kind of question people ask when they don't want to deal with the truth. And that's when it hit me. Everything holding our marriage together, everything that had kept us going for 12 years was already dead. I didn't need any more proof. I didn't need any more explanations. The man I had been in our marriage, the one who trusted her, who believed in us, was gone. There was nothing left to search for. Nothing left to fix. I couldn't keep living in that lie. The trust had been broken and no amount of pretending could make it whole again. I had to face the truth. This wasn't just a bump in the road. This wasn't something we could fix. My wife had made her choices. And I had to make mine. The first day I decided to leave, it wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches. The decision had been made in silence, in the stillness of my own thoughts. The words I had been holding inside, the ones I was too afraid to speak, finally surfaced. I was done. Harper had made her choices, and it was time for me to make mine. I couldn't stay in a marriage that had been hollowed out by lies and betrayal. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger, though there was plenty of that to go around. No, it was about survival. It was about reclaiming my life. I rented an apartment on the edge of town, in a building that was quieter than I expected. It had a small balcony that overlooked a river, nothing spectacular, but it was mine. I packed only the essentials. A few sets of clothes, my books, and an old record player that had belonged to my father. I didn't take anything that reminded me of Harper. I couldn't bring myself to take the framed photos of our wedding day, or the little trinkets we had collected over the years. I didn't need any of it. What I took with me was everything I had left. Everything that was still mine. I didn't even pack up my laptop or any of the things that connected me to the life I had shared with Harper. I didn't want to carry the weight of our shared history with me. It had all been a lie, and carrying those reminders would only drag me further into the past. When I told Harper I was leaving, it wasn't a big scene. She didn't cry. She didn't beg me to stay. She didn't even try to stop me. She just looked at me like she expected it. Like this was something that had been coming for a long time, even though I hadn't said anything outright. When I told her I was filing for divorce, she didn't seem surprised either. It was almost as if she knew it was inevitable, that whatever had been left between us had long since died. I didn't even get the satisfaction of her protesting or making some kind of plea. She was already checked out. And in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't the only one who had been living in a lie. We had both been living in a version of our marriage that was already gone. I left that evening, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and a small box of photos that I had taken from the living room. It wasn't much, but it felt like all I needed. It wasn't about the material things. It was about what I could take with me that would remind me of who I used to be, who I still could be. I didn't want to be the guy who stayed in a toxic relationship, the guy who stayed for the sake of staying. I wanted to be someone else, someone stronger. I filed the divorce papers the next day. It wasn't a long, drawn-out process. There wasn't much to dispute. Harper had already made her choice, and I didn't have any attachment to the life we had built. It wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't about making her feel as bad as I felt. It was about closure. I needed to move forward. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of our past. The first few days in the apartment were strange. There was a sense of relief, but it was mixed with an overwhelming sense of loss. I couldn't deny that. I had been with Harper for over 12 years. Even though everything had fallen apart, there was a part of me that mourned what we had once shared. But that grief wasn't enough to keep me from moving forward. I couldn't keep looking back. I couldn't keep wondering what went wrong. I had to look ahead. The first night I slept in the apartment, I didn't feel alone, even though I was. The emptiness of the space was unsettling at first, but I didn't mind it. It felt like freedom in its purest form. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't have to wonder where Harper was or who she was with. I didn't have to make excuses for the distance between us. I could just exist. I could breathe. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a deep, uninterrupted breath. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I settled into a routine that felt natural, though I was still adjusting. I kept myself busy. Work was a welcome distraction, but it wasn't enough to fill the hole inside me. I started running again, something I had stopped doing when Harper and I first got together. I used to love it, just hitting the pavement early in the morning, clearing my mind. The rhythm of my feet on the ground was a comforting sound. I didn't realize how much I had missed it until I started again. It felt like I was rediscovering pieces of myself that I hadn't known were lost. On weekends, I went to my brother's place. He was my sounding board, the one person who could always make me laugh, even when I didn't feel like it. We started cooking dinner together. Something we used to do when we were younger, just the two of us in the kitchen, experimenting with recipes. We'd pull out the old records, drink beer, and talk about everything and nothing. It was simple, but it felt right. It felt like I was finally finding my footing again, like I was building a new version of myself. I wasn't trying to forget the past, but I wasn't going to let it define me either. The man I had been was gone, and that was okay. This new man was someone I could be proud of. I stopped checking Harper's social media. It was tempting at first to see what she was up to find out if she was still seeing her boss or if she had moved on with someone else. But I realized it wasn't going to help me move forward. It wasn't going to bring me peace. So I let it go. The silence that came with it was more than just absence. It was a kind of power. I wasn't letting her actions control me anymore. I wasn't letting her decisions define how I felt about myself. I was free. It wasn't easy. There were days when I still felt the weight of the betrayal. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what went wrong. But each morning, I would wake up and remind myself that I was still here. I was still breathing. I was still capable of living my life. I started dating again, though cautiously. I wasn't looking for anything serious. But there was something liberating about meeting new people, talking to someone who didn't know anything about my past, who didn't have any expectations. It was like a fresh start. And then one evening I met Sarah. It wasn't a love at first sight kind of thing. It wasn't some grand romantic gesture. But it was different. The conversations weren't strained. They didn't feel forced. We laughed about nothing in particular, and it felt easy. She was kind, understanding, and had been through her own kind of heartbreak. We connected in a way that felt natural, like two people who had walked through their own storms and come out the other side, stronger for it. We started doing simple things together, hiking, going to the theater, grabbing coffee. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It was about enjoying the present, something I had neglected for far too long. Harper's face faded into the background of my life. She was no longer the first thing I thought about when I woke up. She wasn't the person I spent all my time trying to fix. It wasn't easy, but I was learning to value the present. I was learning to value myself again. When I wake up in the apartment overlooking the river, I don't think about what I lost. I think about who I've become, and that's what matters. It took time, but eventually, I settled into a new rhythm. The first few weeks felt like I was walking through a fog, each day blending into the next, the weight of my past dragging at my heels. But slowly, the fog started to lift, and I found myself feeling more like the man I used to be. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about accepting it, embracing it, and moving forward. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from the pain. I was facing it head-on. I still remember the first morning I woke up without the constant weight of Harper's absence looming over me. It wasn't that I didn't miss her. I did, in ways I didn't fully understand at the time, but there was a new kind of freedom in the silence of my apartment. No more wondering where she was or who she was with. No more trying to read between the lines of her actions. No more second-guessing myself. I was free to be myself again, to rediscover parts of me that had been buried beneath the weight of our relationship. The days became easier. I started doing things for me again. It wasn't just about work or trying to keep busy to distract myself. It was about finding joy in the small things that I had neglected for so long. I started cooking again, simple meals that I could enjoy at my own pace. It felt grounding, like I was taking control of my life again. I even picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned. Reading for pleasure, playing my guitar, watching movies without having to justify it to anyone. I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone anymore. For the first time in ages, I could do things just because I wanted to. I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. The man I was before Harper, the one who wasn't afraid to pursue what he loved, was coming back to life. It felt like a quiet victory, like I was learning to live for myself again. Of course, there were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned my decisions, moments when the pain crept back in. There were nights when I would lie awake, wondering if I had made the right choice. The silence in my apartment would feel deafening, and I would find myself thinking about the life I had lost. But then I would remind myself of the truth, that Harper had made her choice, and it wasn't the one I had imagined. She had made her bed, and now it was time for me to lie in mine, free from the weight of her betrayal. I found myself rebuilding my confidence piece by piece. I started taking better care of myself, physically and emotionally. I went for long runs along the river, pushing myself further than I had in years. I began going to the gym again, lifting weights that had once felt like mountains to me, and slowly the weight of my past began to feel lighter. The physical transformation mirrored the emotional one happening within me. Each step I took, each pound I lost, was a reminder that I was moving forward. My coworkers noticed the change. They could see it in the way I carried myself, the way I interacted with them. I wasn't the same person who had come in a few months ago, broken and defeated. I was starting to find myself again, to reclaim the man I used to be. They didn't ask about my divorce. Thankfully, they respected my privacy. But it was clear that I was different, and that was enough for me. I didn't need anyone's approval or validation. I just needed to keep moving forward, one day at a time. I was getting better at being alone too. I didn't need to fill every moment with distractions. I started enjoying the solitude, the quiet that used to feel so uncomfortable. It wasn't loneliness anymore, it was peace. I began to realize that I had been afraid of being alone for so long, but now I embraced it. It gave me the space to heal, to think, and to reflect. I wasn't defined by the person I used to be with, and I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was enough on my own. On weekends, I started making time for things that mattered. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with over the years. I spent time with my brother, who had always been a constant source of support, and we shared simple pleasures, cooking together, playing video games, watching old movies. We didn't need to talk about my divorce or Harper. Just being in each other's company was enough. It was in these small moments that I began to realize how much I had lost and how much I had to gain. It was during one of these weekends that I ran into Sarah again. She was a friend of a friend, someone I had known briefly years ago, but we had never really connected. But this time, it felt different. There was an ease between us, a sense of comfort that I hadn't experienced in a long time. We didn't talk about my past, at least not at first. We just shared stories, laughed at silly things, and enjoyed each other's company. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that there were still good people out there, people who weren't defined by their mistakes. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I spent more time together. We went on long hikes, explored new restaurants in town, and had deep conversations that didn't feel forced. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It was about finding joy in the simple moments, the ones that didn't require grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Sarah didn't judge me for my past. She didn't know the full story, and I didn't need to tell her. She accepted me for who I was in that moment, and that was enough. It wasn't about replacing Harper. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending that everything was fine. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward in a healthy way. I wasn't trying to heal my wounds with distractions or trying to fill a void with someone else. I was learning to live again, to be present in my own life, and to appreciate the people who chose to be a part of it. As I got to know Sarah better, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I had learned over the past few months. I had spent so much time trying to fix things with Harper, trying to make sense of a relationship that was already broken. But I realized now that I didn't need to fix anyone. I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. I just needed to be myself, to be honest with myself, and to focus on what truly mattered. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I still had a long way to go in terms of healing. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I was no longer defined by my past. I was building a future, one that was mine to create. I didn't need to look back anymore. I didn't need to hold on to what had been. I had learned to value the present, and that, more than anything, gave me the strength to move forward. 2 months had passed since I left. I had settled into my new routine, and while the pain of the divorce still lingered, it no longer consumed me. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Harper hadn't reached out much, just a few texts, a couple of calls, but nothing that required a response. She seemed to have moved on, and honestly, I had too. But then, one day, I received a message from her. A simple text that read, "We need to talk." I didn't know why, but I felt a sense of finality. I didn't expect apologies or a grand reconciliation. I had already done my grieving. The woman I had loved was gone, and there was nothing left for me to hold onto. Still, I agreed to meet her. It was time for both of us to face the reality of what had happened and close this chapter once and for all. We chose a neutral spot, a cafe in the city center. It wasn't too far from where I lived, but it felt like the right place to have this conversation. I didn't expect anything life-changing, but I needed closure. We both did. When Harper arrived, she looked impeccable as always. Her makeup was flawless, her hairstyle just right. She looked as though she had spent hours preparing for this meeting, but her eyes, those eyes, betrayed her. They were anxious, almost nervous. She was trying to keep it together, but I could see the cracks in her armor. We sat down at a small table by the window. The cafe was busy, but the noise around us seemed to fade as soon as we sat down. Harper started the conversation, her voice steady but low. She admitted to the affair. She didn't apologize at first, she just said it happened, that it wasn't something she had planned. She told me she never intended to hurt me. But the words sounded rehearsed, and I could tell she was trying to soften the blow. "It just happened," she said. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Danny. I wasn't angry. I had done the anger, the betrayal, the heartache. I had been through all of that already, and honestly, I was beyond it. I didn't need her explanations or her apologies. Everything had already been said between us, even if it hadn't been voiced out loud. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could. I don't need the details," I said quietly, looking down at my coffee cup. "I just needed to hear the truth. And I appreciate you being honest, even if it's a little too late." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let myself get caught up in them. This was my moment of clarity. I had nothing left to prove. This was no longer about what we had lost. It was about what we had both chosen, separately. She reached across the table, her hand hovering just above mine, as if unsure whether she could touch me. I didn't take her hand. Instead, I pulled back slightly and leaned in, looking at her squarely. "I don't want you back, Harper," I said softly, but with finality. "I don't need any more explanations. I just need to let you go." For a moment, neither of us spoke. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything between us hanging in the air. And then, without saying another word, I stood up. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was just the quiet realization that everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. She stood with me, her voice trembling as she said, "Danny, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded, offering her a small, understanding smile. "I know," I said. "But sometimes people just do." We shook hands. There was no hug, no reconciliation, no grand finale. Just two people who had once loved each other, facing the truth and accepting that their paths had split long ago. I walked out first, feeling the weight lift off my chest. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a farewell. A farewell to the version of our life that no longer existed. After the final meeting, things began to change. I felt lighter, almost as if I had stepped out from under a cloud I didn't even realize had been hanging over me. The weight of the past, the guilt, the confusion, all of it faded, replaced by a strange sense of relief. It was the kind of relief you feel when you finally let go of something that had been suffocating you for far too long. I was finally free. I didn't feel the need to rush into anything, and I wasn't actively seeking a relationship. But I was open to life again. Open to meeting new people, open to enjoying the things I once loved, open to letting my life unfold naturally. It was during this period of newfound freedom that I met Sarah. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but she was different. She had been through her own struggles, her own heartbreak. But unlike me, she wasn't weighed down by it. She had learned to let go and move forward, just like I was trying to do. We began meeting up, first for coffee, then for hikes, and eventually we even went to the theater together. There were no grand gestures, no pressure. It was just two people enjoying each other's company without the baggage of their pasts dragging them down. It felt easy. It felt right. I realized as I got to know Sarah that I hadn't lost 12 years of my life with Harper. I had learned from them. I had learned to value the present, to appreciate what I had in front of me, and to let go of what no longer served me. I wasn't the man I had been before I met Harper, but I wasn't the man I had been during the affair, either. I was someone new, someone who had learned to stand on his own 2 feet, to rebuild and to embrace the future with an open heart. When I woke up in the morning looking out at the river from my small apartment, I didn't think about what I had lost. I thought about who I had become. And that, above all, was what mattered most. Life was beginning again, and this time it was mine to live.